Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Oh, you know when you've entered a new age of civility on Capitol Hill. Not that there was ever an old one. Last year, Republicans promised that if they got back control of Congress, things were going to be a lot different. They were certainly right about that. First, there was the time one of the Republicans had to be held back from strangling Matt Gaetz, and now this. The party of law and order could use some order itself. There's just so many instances where people are fighting and there's nobody to root for. This is one of them. If you're lucky, your enemy destroys themselves, though that practically never happens, but we can dream, can't we? Congresswoman Marjorie Greene got into an argument on the floor of the House with the other female pipe bomb thrower Lauren Boebert. Greene claims that she was preparing to introduce articles of impeachment against Joe Biden, and that Boebert stole her thunder by trying to beat Greene to the punch and introduce her own articles of impeachment first. So Greene did exactly what you would expect from her. She marched to the floor, confronted Lauren Boebert about this, and called her a little And this isn't the first time those two have locked horns. Greene, along with Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, and a few other of the GOP's craziest, is part of the so-called Freedom Caucus, which has been trying to assert control over the GOP and looking to undermine McCarthy ultimately for their own personal benefit. Back in 2021, when Democrats controlled the House, they kicked Marjorie Greene along with Paul Gosar off of their respective committees over their controversial social media posts. When Republicans took back control of the House last year, Kevin McCarthy was able to get Greene to pledge loyalty to him by promising to put her back on the committees that the Democrats had kicked her off of. As a result, Greene has actually been forced to have to cooperate with someone, something she's practically never done in her entire life, and she's been acting as McCarthy's right-hand woman. Clearly, she's hitched her wagon to Kevin McCarthy's falling star. This has brought her into direct conflict with the rest of the Freedom Caucus. As the Freedom Caucus sees it, Greene has basically sold out to the establishment GOP, and all she wants to do now is to secure her own position, which is exactly what the rest of them have been trying to do. Marjorie Greene is so eager to finally have something she can point to as an accomplishment that she wants to be the first to introduce articles of impeachment against Joe Biden. Sure, it's not going to go anywhere, but it will give the racist rubes she depends on for votes a sugar rush for a couple of days, and like the rest of the GOP, she understands that's what her real job is. She really won't have another opportunity like this ever. And so when Lauren Boebert tried to preempt Greene, she went ballistic, confronting Boebert in public, calling her a little B-word. Keep in mind, this is the same Marjorie Greene who just a few weeks ago became a laughingstock when she was banging her gavel on the floor of the House and demanding decorum in the People's House. Even the Republicans who were there that day had to laugh at her. And now the rumor is that Greene's own colleagues in the Freedom Caucus are mulling over whether or not to throw her out of the group. And if that happened, the irony would be beyond excruciating. But considering how Greene has positioned and ingratiated herself with the GOP establishment, kicking her out of the Freedom Caucus probably isn't the boss move that Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert think it is. Now at this point, you might expect that Lauren Boebert would be doing what she does the other 90% of the time, wagging her finger, laughing to herself, and taking a victory lap. But she hasn't been, and there's a good reason for that. She's got some problems of her own. A few days ago, there was a one-day blink-and-you'll-miss-it news cycle about how Lauren Boebert's teenage son, who is not married by the way, has become a baby daddy. He went and got some girl knocked up and didn't even bother to tie the knot first. And as for Lauren Boebert, she tried to whitewash this by saying that she herself had become a teen mom. And if this tale of rural raunchiness sounds real familiar, it should. Back in 2008, Sarah Palin's teenage daughter, Bristol, also got herself knocked up out of wedlock during the middle of Sarah and John McCain's damned-to-fail presidential campaign, no less. Talk about great timing. Sarah Palin tried to do a quick PR cleanup of the matter, and that went about as well as the rest of what she did. She claimed that the two kids would be getting married right away. But of course, that didn't happen. In fact, according to Bristol, they broke up right after the child was born. There was some loose talk the next year for a hot minute about another imminent engagement, but that didn't happen either. Though to be fair, Levi Johnston did finally get married, just not to Bristol Palin. Bristol's been saying that Levi Johnston was never really part of their son's life either. So you have an absentee father, a deadbeat dad, a teenager no less, But nobody makes an issue out of that guy or her poor choice in men, or the quality of the dating pool in her community. It's not racially pathologized. Nobody says this is a sign of bad culture. It's just a one-day bit of gossip, and then the white media immediately moves on, nothing to see here. All of them, by the way, moved on. We didn't have this tsunami of jokes from late-night comedians calling her a baby mama. Of course they couldn't do that. Think of the children, as long as they're not black children. Now, these are the same people who try to lecture black people about something being wrong with us because of out-of-wedlock births, and these are the people who are the leaders of their particular movement. This is who their people chose to follow. All their talk about abstinence and how black people have something wrong with them and that this is because of black men who don't shoulder their responsibilities and black women who can't keep their legs closed. But this is what's going on with them. Projection. That's what it is and what it's always been. America's classic racial distraction. As long as we're talking about black people, then what we're not doing is we're not talking about Lauren Boebert or Sarah Palin's little party animals. Now, the white media chose to make a target out of Nick Cannon because he has 12 kids. And although I don't endorse that, the truth of the matter is these women knew what they were getting into with him. And as long as he's claiming that he has the financial wherewithal, well, I guess they deserve each other. But that's not the point. We all know what the white media's sudden fascination with Nick Cannon and his children is about. They're still salty over certain comments that he made a while back when they were trying to plaster him as an anti-Semite. They thought that that was going to be the end of him, but it turns out that he wasn't so easily gotten rid of, so they've been attacking him ever since for having so many children. But unlike certain Alaskan gigolos, Nick Cannon actually takes care of his children. He's actually in their lives, though you wouldn't know it by how the white media talks about him. But let's not be intentionally simple-minded here. The white media's problem with Nick Cannon isn't so much how many different mothers he has for his children. In fact, it's not even the number of kids he's got. You got white men in Hollywood and in government and in corporate America and in these rural communities out there in the great Southwest and other places. They got many more kids than Nick Cannon, though they don't have anywhere near the money that he's got, and the white media is not concerned about them. They don't care about that, but a black man, even one who's got the money, even one who has no rancor between his multiple wives and such, all of a sudden they're obsessed. This is about downing him, because he is a black man, and they see that he's got a number of children, and that scares the hell out of them. They see a black man with a large number of children, and that scares them with the threat of genetic annihilation. But this sure does put Lauren Boebert and Sarah Palin in proper perspective, now doesn't it? See, when you take your political cues from the kind of depraved entertainment put out by Fox News, when you actually try to govern according to Tucker Carlson's commentaries, this is what you get. Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and the rest of that satanic sideshow are all just putting on a performance. They don't hold any political offices. You see, they don't actually answer to their audiences because their audiences don't have the ability to vote them off their show. But worse than that, Fox News' audience is comprised of a monolithic gang of racist right-wingers. All you gotta do is keep feeding them the red meat, and they'll keep watching. Problem is for these politicians, including the Republican ones, their constituencies are not comprised of nothing but Fox News viewers. The Fox News hosts have the luxury of spouting whatever stupidity they want because they don't have any skin in the game. They can say whatever crazy stuff they want precisely because they're not actually risking anything. Their game is nothing but getting ever-increasing ratings, or at least holding on to the ones that they got. And that's a completely different game from a politician who actually has to govern. But as the GOP's base has seen the world changing and leaving them behind, they've been demanding that someone cater to their mental derangement, that someone validate all their psychopathic racism. Hence the rise of Fox News and right-wing hate radio for the last 4 decades. They went from saying that they oppose Democrats to saying Democrats are un-American to now saying that they're an existential threat to the white right, because that's what you have to do when you're an entertainer. You can't come back with the same old material. You have to top whatever you did the last time. The audience expects it. So Fox News personalities have become more extreme with the rhetoric, which conditions their base to feel emboldened to act on their own violent nature. It feeds on itself. This is how the white right consolidated and concentrated itself as Fox News viewers, and this large, solidified audience has managed to have a disproportionate effect on the GOP leadership by making them speak their racism out loud and then have to openly act on it just to keep their base's support. This is what happens when you blur the line between the idiotic entertainment of Fox News and the real serious work of government. Because their audience has been told for the last 40 years that the rest of the country is with them and agrees with them, that everyone likes their anti-black racism, and that all they have to do is just demand that the Republicans act on it, well, that's what DeSantis has been doing for the last few years. And how's that working out for him? Fox News' bread and butter is to feed their right-wing base red meat in the form of racist diatribes and media fantasies about white replacement and critical race theory, etc. But what happens when someone tries to live on a steady diet of nothing but red meat? Looking at the Fox News viewership, you're seeing the political equivalent of exactly what happens. This is why they're ready to have knockdown dragouts in public, because they have to. And they're not fighting over anything of substance, but rather they're just fighting to jockey for position, anything to impress their degenerate voter base, that satanic horde of ever-dwindling racist rubes who vote for them more out of habit than anything else. Since nobody else is stupid enough to try to cater to these deplorables, the GOP gets their vote by default. And this is what they get in return. This is why the red states are the toilets of the U.S. The Republican politicians in those states realized a long time ago they didn't have to actually produce anything to get their constituents' votes. All they had to do was crap on black people, and that would be enough. So you have these two-bit conservative con men ripping off their states, and their constituents don't really mind because as long as they say something blatantly racist against black people, as long as they propose some unconstitutional message legislation that they know from the start will be struck down by the courts, all they got to do is that, and this will delight the racists and they'll continue to get some more votes. This is what moron DeSantis has been doing. It's the political equivalent of being penny wise and pound foolish, but it also goes to show how calcified the brains, if they can be called that, of the Republican voter base have become. They see the world leaving them behind. Things have changed, and they're determined not to change with it. So they're becoming politically obsolete, and at this point these relics from a bygone era are going to waste all their little time and money trying to force the world to go back in time, or at the very least, they just want someone to psychologically masturbate them and tell them that they'll freeze the world the way that it is, more or less. The result is that you have politicians who fully recognize that the only thing their constituents expect them to do is political spitball fighting, and that they want to be entertained. So they better top whatever performative extremism they did last time. This is what's become of the conservative movement. All they're trying to do is preserve a white past that never truly existed, and in the process they failed to do the one thing that every living organism must do: adapt. And since their political culture is all about showing how angry they can be, how absurdly hostile they can be, how needlessly combative they can be with everyone, of course they're going to wind up at each other's throats. Having practiced being irrational and violently disagreeable with everybody else, what happens when they have disagreements amongst themselves? Well, what won't happen is anything civil, because they haven't practiced civility. All they've practiced is how to attack, so that's what they're doing. This is the Republican Party, a gang of clowns brawling with each other to impress a motley crew of inbred racists who have been weaned on 40-plus years of right-wing hate radio and false news, Fox News. And after decades of having racist rhetoricians telling them that their bigoted daydreams would make for good policy, they're now demanding that politicians cater to their perverted obsessions and go back to the 1920s and make their putrid daydreams real. The white right is doing the best job of making campaign ads against themselves, not just to voters who aren't Republicans, but also to their own constituents. It's long been said that American politics has become like pro wrestling. This comparison is actually more accurate than people know. In pro wrestling, you have good guys and bad guys, or as they call them in the business, baby faces and heels. This is done in order to get the audience to emotionally invest in what is actually just a meaningless pretend athletic competition. Now, while the good guy versus the bad guy dynamic is the foundation of pro wrestling, it does get old after a while, so something that the promotions have done since the 1980s to switch the formula up a little bit is to introduce a third party, one who isn't aligned with the heels or the baby faces, an outside faction who isn't really at war with the heels or the baby faces, but who claims that they're at war with the entire company itself. This is a wild card who are just out for themselves. Now, what goes unsaid, though, is that when wrestling promotions bring in these third factions, They're never aligned with the babyfaces. They usually are just a second group of heels. They act like the heels, talk like the heels, and on the few occasions that they work with anyone outside of their group, it's usually with the heels. This is what the Freedom Caucus has done. They act like the Republicans, talk like the Republicans, and while they feud with the GOP, if they vote on something, you can bet it won't be with the Democrats. Both Bernie Sanders and even Alexandria Cortez have tried their own versions of this, like with the Squad, but apparently the Democrats don't do the radical third faction thing very well. And as for the Republicans, the Freedom Caucus has carved out a niche, however small, but it also makes it where they can't afford to agree with anyone, because their brand is to be the outsiders, the radical contrarians, disagreeing just for the sake of disagreeing. And while their audience, constituents may be enjoying the show, they're not getting anything done. Never forget, the real reason all of these white political factions are fighting each other is to see which one of them is going to hold the whip over us. There's a lesson in all this for black people, too. When you seek to entertain people instead of lead them, when your movement is about performative extremism and not substantive policy, when you practice fighting people nonstop, trolling nonstop, putting on a show by displaying how over the top you can be, then you're not really part of a movement. You're part of a mob. Mobs are unthinking herds. They make a lot of noise, but ultimately they don't actually say anything. They may move around a little bit, but they never go anywhere. Take some time to examine your own stance on the issues and how you pursue them. And watch these other folks, especially in the comment sections or people you see posting videos, folks who make it a habit to attack the new voices of black media. Watch what they say and do too. Because what you'll also see is these are folks who also like to be over the top with their own displays of disagreement. They're contrary just for the sake of being contrary, not because they're trying to bring anything meaningful to the proceedings, but simply because they're hoping to make a name for themselves. Well, I've got a suggestion for what that name should be. Fools. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Loke Thies, Frederica Moore, HRM Mathis, Starlet Thompson, and Keith Green. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.